Hello, everyone. My name's Colin Druin. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Executive Director of Pride at Work Canada, and I'll be your MC today. Even though Pride season looks a little different this year, it's great that we can all still be connected around topics important to our communities. And thank you for taking the time to join us. I'm really impressed by the incredible lineup of speakers that Jade Pichette and the team at Pride at Work Canada put together this summer. And with that, it's my great pleasure to welcome you today to our virtual ProPride event, Queering the Future of Work. I know that we're all becoming old pros at virtual events, but I have a few tips that might help you have the best possible experience with us today. First, there are active links in the captioning and translation links window displayed here in the event. Each will open a new browser window. One link provides captioning in English, the other in French. If you're having any trouble with audio or video, try reconnecting to today's session using the Adobe Connect app rather than in your browser. Or try closing some streaming services to help improve the quality of audio or the video. If closing other windows and streaming services doesn't help your experience, or if you continue to have technical issues, please contact Adobe support by phone using the number displayed on the screen in the Welcome Notes window. For any type of assistance, feel free to chat directly and privately with one of the event hosts. We ask that you refrain from asking for assistance with technical issues in the group chat. We've got a number of people joining today, and we would love for that chat to be a place where everyone can focus on the content of today's session. We are recording the session today, so if your internet connection becomes weak or if you experience any technical issues, you can always log off and watch the video when we send it out later this week. There's also going to be a recap posted on our website next week. Now, let's get going. For those of you who are not super familiar with Pride at Work Canada, I'm pleased to let you know that we're a national not-for-profit member organization for Canadian employers. We support over 150 employers in their diversity and inclusion strategies as they pertain to the grounds of gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation. If this is your first Pride at Work Canada event, I want to say welcome, and I encourage you to check out all of our programs and services available at prideatwork.ca. Today's event is presented in partnership with our friends at the Conference Board of Canada, Canada's foremost independent evidence-based applied research organization. If you're not already regularly checking conferenceboard.ca for updates on COVID-19 and its impact on Canada's economy, I suggest you start tapping into the wealth of resources right now. As your co-host today, Pride at Work Canada and Conference Board of Canada are very happy to have you with us. As a national organization, Pride at Work Canada works on the traditional territories of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. We know that underemployment, unemployment, and housing insecurity disproportionately impact LGBTQ people. On every metric, we see these outcomes worsen for Two-Spirit and LGBTQ Indigenous people. That's why, in the work that we do, we seek to reduce barriers to meaningful employment by working together with Indigenous organizations and accepting feedback from Indigenous workers and job seekers to better understand how we can continually improve those outcomes. Pride at Work Canada's offices take up space in the Dish with One Spoon territory, Takaranto. This is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. Though Pride Month may be over in our home city of Toronto, it's still high Pride season for Pride at Work Canada since we have festivals yet to come in spots across the country. It's incredibly important for us all to remember that the contemporary celebrations of Pride that we enjoy are actually rooted in protest and resistance to police violence against LGBTQ+ people. Pride at Work Canada stands in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and people of color who seek to further resist the violence that continues to be perpetrated against our communities. When speaking about this part of our present and its connection to our history, a lot of folks tend to focus on the Stonewall riots of 1969, and the impact of that historic event can't be understated. However, I would encourage you all to look at some of the events that have shaped the history of our movement in Canada, events like the Toronto Bathhouse raids in 1981, or the Montreal Sex Garage raids of 1990, just to name two. Now, let's get started on today's agenda. We're going to hear some introductory remarks from a few very special guests. Then we'll move into our panel discussion, including questions from you, the audience. And finally, we'll review some further resources available to you on this topic and say goodbye. So let's get started with our opening remarks. Sylvia Maracle is the Executive Director of the Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centres, where she's worked for over 40 years. She's the Mohawk Wolf Clan member of the Mohawks of Tyendinaga. She's been granted Doctor of Laws from the University of Guelph, York University, Trent University, and Queen's University, and is an Officer of the Order of Canada. She's consistently recognized for her work developing, implementing, and teaching Indigenous culture-based management and creating strategies to end violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. She was one of the founding co-chairs of the national organization Two Spirits in Motion, and it's our honor to have her here with us today, and my privilege to introduce Dr. Sylvia Maracle. Take it away.
Sego, Segoli, Skenagoa, greetings to all of you. I trust that the great peace is with each of you. I'm enthused about how many people are joining the call. As a member of both of the Two-Spirited community and the broader community, we love our celebrations. We like to recognize Pride, and clearly we're missing those opportunities during COVID-19. So we all sign up for these kinds of gatherings. So I've been asked to make a few remarks about queering the future of work, and I thought I'd use my own journey and the journey of the work that I do. I work for a nonprofit organization and have for a very long time. There are about 92 full-time equivalents at our provincial office, and about at least 20 identify as Two-Spirited LGBT. And so heading an organization for a long time, for over 40 years, it has been my own sort of journey. And one of the journeys that I'm not sure we focus on sufficiently is that we literally have to come out every day. It's not a coming out one time to our family, to our friends, to our boards of directors. We're in the work environment we're involved in. We have to all the time, and the fact that I'm using the word "have to" is part of the problem, and that we still have not created a holistic worldview where we are always considered to be part of the circle, and I say that that's important because how we're going to go about queering the future of work is to make sure that we have created the safe spaces, that we have the words, that we have the conversations, that we have the ability to support each other, both in coming out and in being out. So some techniques over the years that we have learned about work is I want to very quickly reflect on sort of COVID-19. And those of you who have been able to work and who have found that you can work from your home, and now there are parts of the country where people are returning to the new normal. It seems to me that the new normal is something that can help us find different ways to be engaged in work, but also find that maybe working at home for parts of the time will deal with some of the barriers that people feel in their spaces of employment. So one of the things, that we have to do the basic things. We have to make sure that people feel safe, that they can talk about being who they are, that they don't have to speak either with pronouns or without pronouns, and in order to do that, people say to me the first thing is, I want to talk about this, I want to learn about it, but I don't know how to have the conversation. Well, that's exactly the question to start with someone, is say, I don't know how to talk about this, can you help me? What's appropriate ways to to phrase questions. What are the terms that we use? One of the issues that I've had to deal with that you may or may not have, but some of you will, is that when we're going to our knowledge keepers, to our elders and traditional people, many of whom, of course, went to residential school, did not have two-spirited teachings handed down to them. And because English is their second language, they're very fond of pronouns. And the problem is we have to identify our pronouns now at the end of our emails, when in fact, if we learn to speak without the notion of pronouns, we might be more respectful and better off. There's nothing wrong with calling someone their name, and there's nothing wrong with addressing people by titles if they hold titles or what they hold. And I think that's a simple and important lesson, because then we don't have to worry about being different. We become part of a whole as we create space in the whole for real equity. I think the other thing that organizations have to do, and I'm only telling you things that we ourselves have gone through. I mean, we never had gendered washrooms, so it wasn't a big deal. We have spaces where people can see each other working, and that's all people, so that everybody can be safe. We have already, we had a good description of inclusion and equity and family relations. And we put them in a nice poster, and we put them in our bylaw, our constitution, and we put them on the wall, and then we never paid any attention to them. And so regularly organizations have to pay attention, so that it's not just about words or a poster that's up on the wall, that it actually imbues the whole organization. So our organization, and I get that, it's small in comparison to where many of you work, but the fact of the matter is we can do it. So we go to people in terms who represent the two-spirited LGBTQIA plus community, and have them come in and do all staff training for us. Have them talk about why homophobia is there, transphobia, with racism on the top of it, and expose us to sort of ways to have the communication, to be respectful, to how to include people. And we do that training regularly, and we also do it for our member centers. We've begun more recently to do very active interventions at the encouragement of our youth council, who have a very, very different attitude than we have learned or that we have lived through. Those of us who are older, and much more open and much more accepting. And so we're trying to make sure that the space is there in our community organizations for them, that there's support for their organizing, and that they participate in our governance structures. And in fact, 25% of the board of the Federation are young people who are 18 to 24 years of age. They select their members. And also we're making sure that two-spirited issues are engaged. And in fact, we have community projects going on to increase access by young people who are identifying as two-spirited or questioning to come to it and to get engaged. Senior managers of the organization really need to take responsibility. It's easy to say we should do these things. It's another thing to create a space where natural leadership can come forward and the people who have the titles and responsibilities do it. And we have to be made accountable for what we do. I think sometimes there are people in our community who thinks my only intent anymore is to develop a part of the two-spirited community. It isn't, but it's a part of the community that's been left out for a long time. I think as we move forward, it's important for us all to learn our terms as the definitions and increasing issues with respect to transphobia. Of our 20 or so staff, they're all involved if they choose in the Two-Spirited Committee, and there are 3 non-binary people. So the more that you show people and demonstrate to people and talk about the issue, the more people who are going to be interested in working with you from the community. And there are ways, to make sure that we're inviting them. I mean, we've gotten so micro in our organization that we have changed the process of hiring to make sure that we're not using any pronouns in interviews, that we're inviting people to come and find out that it is a positive space, and that clearly is beginning to work in expanding it. I think that it's also important, when I was talking about leadership, that corporately we do more than just use the word equity and inclusion. It becomes about the behavior and modifying all of our processes to make sure that can happen. I think I want to talk about a moment just for justice, and this will be my last comment. An elder a long time ago, we were talking about justice, and he identified as he, said to us, there is no justice in law. Law is a statute that controls a process, so that while we had made improvements in Canada generally and need to pay attention as employers, if people are looking for justice and social justice, we are not going to find it in law. We are going that real justice, that social justice, is going to come from reaffirming our relationships with the natural world and the spirit world, and the whole notion of our concept in our community of Two-Spirited is that there is a continuum, and there's room and space for everyone, and only when everyone is involved is the circle is complete. So I'll stop there with my remarks. Thank you for listening, Donato.
Sorry, my microphone. Thank you so much, Dr. Maracle. I really appreciate the comment about asking questions. I don't know how to talk about this. Can you help me? It's a tough question for some people to ask, but it's really important to take those steps. And I was really happy to see in the chat that a number of people took that step just while you were talking. So we very much appreciate having you here with us to start so many conversations. Our next remarks are from the person who actually represents my in-laws in the Ontario legislature. And she's the first openly queer Black person to be elected in Canada. Dr. Jill Andrew is MPP for Toronto St. Paul's and the NDP Critic for Culture and Women's Issues. She's also a member of the Ontario NDP Black Caucus, the first caucus of its kind in the country. We're proud to have Dr. Andrew as the keynote speaker of last year's Pride at Work Canada Workplace Summit, and we're proud to have her here today. So feel free to turn on your camera and take it away, Dr. Andrew.
Are you hearing me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
What? Okay. So you can hear me, but you cannot see me. I'm trying to see how I get my camera to focus on my face. This is my first time using your platform. I usually use Zoom. Can someone let me know? Oh, multiple people are messaging. See papers, see papers. See here. Okay, you know, for the sake of time, let's see here. That's weird. Okay, folks, for the sake of time, I'm going to suggest that I just move on forward because I do not see a clear spot as to where to turn the camera to face me. Is that okay with people?
That works for us. Thank you.
Okay, apologies for that. Thank you very, very much for having me. I'm sitting at Queen's Park as we speak, and I want to thank you for having me to this wonderful conversation on queering the future of work. I am Jill Andrew, the first Black queer person to sit in the legislature, and I think the big point that I want to stress in this particular role that I'm in is it is so crucial, it is crucial that we continue to elect folks from our LGBTQ2S plus non-binary communities to ensure that I am not the last, or myself and Terence Kernaghan. Terence Kernaghan is our LGBT critic. He sits from London North Centre, and I gotta say, there's nothing more that we can do than to ensure that the two of us are not the first two and the last. And the ways in which we do that is not just by speaking, but by actively engaging with our communities to ensure that young people, especially, you know, folks who are non-binary, folks who are trans, folks who are living with the oppressions of the stigma and the discrimination of homophobia and transphobia, know that Queen's Park, the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, is their home as well. So I have actively connected with organizations like YMCA Sprott House, organizations and groups through the 519, you know, Friends of Ruby, etc., Black Cap, all of the organizations that I can find to ensure that they know that we are reachable. I've had young people join me at Queen's Park where they've had chances to talk with Black Caucus members, to engage with our leader, Andrea Horvath, and that is all so they can know that this space is their space. Now, is it the most accessible space? Is it a space in which the legacies of white supremacy, of colonialism, the impact of homophobia and transphobia are not felt? That is absolutely not the case. They are felt here, but it's part of our resistance. It's part of our ability to take up space, to be here, to be heard. You know, when I first got into politics 2 years ago, it was June 7th, 2018. I was sworn in on July 11th. One of the first things that this Doug Ford government did was try to erase, essentially, LGBTQ2S plus lives through their attack on sexual education, sex health education, really physical health education, quite frankly. That was one of the first things we saw. And what we continue to see is an absence of real conversations and legislation by this government to support and to amplify our communities, our queer, trans, and non-binary communities. That is some of the work that we're trying to do as the NDP. You know, when we look to September and we look to school reopening, you know, and we look to the fact that we don't have a plan yet, courtesy of Doug Ford and Minister Stephen Lecce, you know, we are left asking, how do the most vulnerable kids, how are they going to make out? How are the most vulnerable families going to make out without a plan for back to school? We know that Black, Indigenous, Two-Spirit, LGBTQ2S plus kids are the most marginalized in our school system as it stands. We know that these kids are often the ones, that have the lower graduation rates. They're often the ones who need additional caring adults to support them, to lift them up, to tell them, remind them that they are good enough just the way they are. That is the work that we need to do as legislators. We need to ensure that we're creating schools, that we're creating communities that can do just that, reinforce for our communities that we are good just the way we are. I'm looking at the chat as well. I just saw someone ask about LGBTQ2+ books. So I have to give a shout out to Glad Day Bookshop. Glad Day Bookshop is an excellent resource located right in the village, Wesleyan Church area, where you can more than certainly find a series of books, educational books, fiction, nonfiction, you name it, to engage young people, to engage families in learning about the realities of our lives, and really, more importantly, learning how to be an ally. I think the most important thing I would tell an ally is you got to know when to step back. You have to know how to listen, and you have to know that you're not bringing any solutions. You're not bringing any answers. People who are, in need of support, people who are, living daily under systemic discrimination, they don't need your answers. What they need is your allyship, your ability to listen, your ability to put yourself in uncomfortable situations so they can be heard, so you can also be a sounding voice, not for your ideas, but for their ideas. I'm also looking to see, I'm curious what the perspectives on queering the workplace and what this looks like from your perspective. I think I may have addressed that, Gerhard, but I'm more than happy to circle back. For me, representation matters, and that specifically means that we need to engage our queer, trans, and non-binary communities at the legislature. We need to ensure that people are interested in running. We have to look at things like proud politics, and we need to see how we can engage. Oops, that's my alarm. My staff are going to be popping in shortly, but nonetheless, this is the way that we can engage communities to ensure that they know that they have a space here with us. It is crucial. Whether that is, and I'm trying to look to see if I see any other questions that I can address quickly. I need to see that others like you are, yep, absolutely. It is not, let's see, 1 second, yep, absolutely. I'm trying to be responsive to what I'm seeing. I see that Rob and Dane are talking about representation mattering. They're talking about representation in senior positions. They're talking about an intersectional approach. Absolutely. And it's very important that you mention senior positions and intersectionality. None of us are homogenous. Within our communities, we are all different. We are all diverse. We all have our own invisible knapsacks, our own lived experiences that we come to the table with. So it is crucial that those identities, that those subjectivities are welcomed in our places of work. And that certainly means having people, who are part of our community at all levels of management. Not only on the front lines, not only, the person that's at the reception saying hello, but also the person that is making top-notch decisions as well. That is crucial. Does self-identification at corporate workplaces help? I strongly believe that people should have the right. I don't believe in calling out people's sexuality. I don't believe that anyone should have to be forced to identify. How people come out is their own personal journey. We cannot lay judgment. We cannot further stigmatize people by judging them based on how they come out. However, if you are able to come out, if you are able to live your truest self publicly, that does help, because it inspires someone else coming up behind you to recognize that it's okay. It is okay. It may not be always easy, but it is okay. And it's our human right, quite frankly. It is our human right, our constitutional right to be able to be ourselves. There's a reason we have gender identity and gender expression in our human rights code. There is a reason. And anyone who is feeling, isolated, who is feeling oppressed, who is feeling erased in their workplace, they absolutely should be telling, their human resources department. They absolutely, frankly, should be contacting their local politicians, who every single one of you on this call pay, by the way, to ensure that they are working hard for you and making sure that they're creating communities where you can see yourself reflected and where you can feel safe. Because if you don't feel safe, my friends, as we all know on this call, productivity goes out the window. The sense of group dynamics, of cohesion, goes out the window. Let me see if I have anything else here. Alrighty, I'm looking at what made you get into your job. I see Zoe asking, what made you get into politics? Oh my goodness, Zoe, there are a million things that made me get into politics. Quite frankly, I was an educator, and I'm still an educator. I believe that politics is simply another education platform, quite frankly. I got into politics because, I was sick and tired, quite frankly, of seeing many of our marginalized young people, having to fight for a seat at their table, having to fight against bullying, sometimes even by adults, quite frankly, to be who they were. So I got into politics to make a difference to our education system. I also got into politics because of healthcare. I know that our community members are often not treated with the same respect, not treated with the same integrity as those who are heterosexual. And I'm realizing that you're not seeing the count, you're not seeing my face, or you're not seeing my hand gestures either. I got into politics to try to make change. Make change on the ground and be at the table to try to make legislative change. And that's what I'm trying to do. 2 years in, 2 years more to go, and possibly more. And I can assure you that this is the work that we have to do. It's timely, it's now, especially against the backdrop, of a world that seems to be awakening, in air quotes, to anti-Black racism, to anti-Indigenous racism, homophobia, transphobia. They are all intersectional. You do not have one, quite frankly, without having the other. And in my opinion, you cannot choose which one you're going to stand up for. So as a member of the official opposition, I'm trying my best to stand up for, with, and beside members of all of these communities who have been at the periphery, quite frankly, at the margins for way too long. And I'm seeing Colin. It looks as though my time is up, but thank you very, very much. Please feel free to reach out to me via email. Today is quite a hectic day, and so things have been a little quirky. That's why I arrived late, but I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jill. And I know that you posted it before. If you could maybe repost your social media coordinates. I think it seems like there's a lot of questions for you, and I'm sure people would love to engage with you there as well. We're always happy to have you, and thanks for mentioning so many great organizations that need our support right now, and thanks for advocating for our community. We really appreciate you taking up that space that you mentioned and being with us today. Our next remarks are from the Canadian Human Rights Commission, courtesy of Keith Smith. He's the Director General of the Policy and Communications Branch at the Commission, oversees the Program Integrity and Employment Equity Division and the newly formed Office of the Federal Housing Advocate. Previous to his current work with the Commission, he worked for the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada as the Director of Policy, also acting as Chief of Staff. During his time at the Ministry, he dealt with a wide range of files, including the amendment to the Canadian Human Rights Act, to add the grounds of gender identity and gender expression. We're very grateful to have you with us today. Take it away, Keith.
Thank you very much, Colin. It's a real pleasure to be part of this important session, and I'm humbled to be part of this presentation with such esteemed doctors, of course, and really fantastic remarks. So thank you very much. Oh, and just before I start, my recommendation for a queer novel would be Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead, an Indigenous queer writer. Fantastic, fantastic novel. So thanks again on behalf of the Canadian Human Rights Commission. I'm speaking to you from Ottawa, the traditional territory. of the Algonquin people. This is a really great topic, and I'm sure most of us could talk for hours on this, but for brevity, I'll limit my remarks to just 4 key points for the Commission. First, I'd like to say the future of work must acknowledge our histories, both shared and unique. This includes histories of colonization, systemic racism, workplace discrimination, and sexual harassment in Canada. We all know that these legacies continue, and for some, the past is the present. The effort to get through a day can be difficult for a lot of people still in Canada. So I would like to say on behalf of the Chief Commissioner of the Commission, myself, and all of us at the Commission, thank you for all of the work all of you have done and all the work you continue to do. We know that our progress thus far and a brighter future for LGBTQ2SI folks at work would not be possible without the history of decades and decades of human rights advocacy. We should not forget how far we've come and take strength in that. The work that you've done, it spans, I would say, geography and time, and all of our unique communities, marching in the streets to raise awareness, filing charter challenges on same-sex marriage, fighting to add gender identity or expression to the Canadian Human Rights Act, the development of international standards, the campaigning on social media to end conversion therapy. Our past work can show not only the common cause we have with each other, but also highlight the unique differences in our communities, varying needs. And it can highlight the privileges of some of us carry, which leads me to my next point. I would like to say that the future of work is full inclusion. We know that our communities are diverse, but only some of us have benefited from legal advances at the same levels. The same is true in our workplaces, especially in management and leadership. Individual success may occur in part because some of us carry privileges that society rewards by putting fewer barriers in our way, growing up with secure housing, living as white, male, cisgender, or able-bodied, or having support from our families, or easy access to healthcare. Or we may benefit from having our queerness be invisible at the office. For those who face systemic racism, trans misogyny, multiple barriers, or intersectional discrimination, and for those who cannot be or choose not to be invisible, many doors remain harder to open. This must change. For those individuals who have reached levels of professional success, it is our responsibility to lead for inclusion, to leverage our privilege, to encourage and implement progress. So I would say call for trans inclusion training at work. Get an action plan in place to identify and dismantle structural racism, champion reconciliation, ensure trans, non-binary, and intersex inclusion. Volunteer to work on your company's accessibility planning. And for organizations and businesses as a whole, the way forward is similar and clear. More, like we all agree that more is needed. 2017, the UN published a guide called Tackling Discrimination Against Lesbian, Gay, Bi, Trans, and Intersex People. It's called the UN Standards of Conduct for Business. And this is what the High Commissioner for Human Rights had to say. He said, if we are to achieve faster global progress towards equality for lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and intersex people, businesses will not only have to meet their human rights responsibilities, they must become active agents of change. Many of you might know that in 2020, Pride at Work collaborated to publish a report on transitioning employees, a survey of policies and practices for trans-inclusive workplaces, which contains next steps beyond the basics for employers to undertake for full inclusion of trans employees. So guides like these can assist employers and service providers to meet both the letter of the law, but also the spirit of equality, which underpins all human rights laws in Canada. We recommend that organizations read and invest in implementing the actions recommended in both these guides. A company's future and its employees will be brighter for it. Third, I'd like to emphasize that inclusion at work is deeply intertwined with inclusion more broadly in our society. You know, we have more and more data and reports emerging. With all of those, we know that the challenge to making better futures at work cannot be separated from the challenges of making better lives in society. How is it safe to work from home if a non-binary youth has no home to work from? How can a Black trans employee make use of her good health benefits at work if her local doctor refuses to treat her? How can a gay man with a visual impairment perform work at his job if the workplace cannot find software that will provide required accessibility technology? We know that human rights are interrelated and interdependent in this way, and we must all be agents of change, not only at work, but also in society. We need to ensure that the systemic impacts of poverty, inequities in employment and wages, unemployment, inaccessible services, and housing insecurity are addressed. At the Commission, we're currently working to put in place a number of new mandates that we've received from the government. These include a pay equity unit to implement the Pay Equity Act, a federal housing advocate to address issues of systemic housing issues across Canada, as well as an accessibility commissioner to ensure people with disabilities enjoy full inclusion under the Accessible Canada Act. All of these new laws and initiatives are, as they are implemented, all these new laws and initiatives, they will help society and workplaces of the future be more welcoming, more diverse, more inclusive for LGBTQ2SI persons. My fourth and last message from the Commission is that we will continue to stand together in all of this work. We will be with you as allies and as advocates. We know we have limitations at the Commission. We're a small organization, just 200 plus. We know that we can't be everywhere or address every need. We cannot commit that every problem we face will be solved perfectly or will be solved tomorrow. But we believe in the promise of a better future. Our workplaces, our communities, our society will improve, and so will we as individuals if we work hard together. I have a plaque in my office that I found a couple summers ago, and it says, "Stay humble, work hard, be kind." For me, I want a future at work to reflect these ideals and to bring about human rights advances for everyone. So I look forward to the panel discussion today as we all learn about how we build this, this future better together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keith. We really appreciate your calls to action for folks who want to make more of an impact in their workplaces, particularly the shout out for the report, Transitioning Employers, which is available for download for free in French English at prideatwork.ca. And thank you so much to all of our very special guests for the remarks. Before we move on to our panel, I'd love to introduce today's moderator for the session. Dr. Maria Giammarco is a senior research associate with the Education Skills and Inclusion teams at the Conference Board of Canada, where she leads the Council on Inclusive Work Environments. She holds a PhD in cognitive neuroscience from the University of Guelph and has a wealth of research and work experience exploring the intersection of science and public policy. As if being incredibly intelligent and insightful weren't enough, Maria is an absolute pleasure to work with and a longtime valued ally of Pride at Work Canada. I'll be back at the end of the session today to wrap up, but for now I leave you in Maria's capable hands. Take it away, Maria.
All right.
Or video anymore.
I believe we have
okay. I'm happy to introduce myself. I'm Cheng Thom, and I use she and her pronouns. I'm a writer and performer and community worker based here in Toronto, colonially known Toronto, the Dish with One Spoon Wampum territory. And yeah, I've worked for several years in the nonprofit sector as well as in the art sector. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be joining everyone for this really vital conversation today.
Hi, bonjour. My name is Peter Flegel. Je suis le directeur du Secretariat de lutte contre le racisme du gouvernement du Canada, donc basé à Ottawa, mais avec un mandat qui touche l'ensemble du pays. Je prends l'occasion de parler en français, étant donné que nous avons 2 langues officielles au Canada, et donc nous travaillons dans les 2 langues, ou nous tentons de le faire à travers notre travail. So my name is Peter Flegel. I am the director of the Federal Anti-Racism Secretariat, based in Ottawa, but with a mandate across the country. I opted to start in French, given that we have 2 official languages that we at the Secretariat strive to work in. I'd also like to take the opportunity to acknowledge that we are all, wherever we are, located on ancestral Indigenous land, and it is our duty of reconciliation and acknowledgement to recognize that we are on ancestral Indigenous territory, much of which is unceded. So I'd like to, je voudrais également remercier les organisateurs pour avoir organisé cet événement et m'avoir invité à participer. C'est grandement apprécié.
And welcome back, Maria and Sarah. Maria, can we hear you?
Can you hear me okay?
I can. Okay.
Okay, I'm seeing some nods. I apologize, my entire program crashed, but I'm back. I'm not sure if anyone was able to hear any of my opening remarks, but I did hear the panelists introduce themselves. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that on the fly. I just wanted to say a couple words quickly before we get into the conversation. Again, I'm not sure if anyone heard me initially from the start, but I just want to say a huge thank you to Colin and Jade for inviting myself and the conference board into this conversation, into this series of events, and note how great it's been to grow the partnership between our organizations and how excited and humbled I am to be speaking to this group of panelists. I had some other things to say about the future of work, but I think in the interest of time, it's great if we can get right into our conversation, which I think will really emphasize in a core way how do we truly transform the future of work and break down barriers and infuse diversity, equity, and inclusion into the core of what we're doing, both in our work at Conference Board and the broader work we do across all our organizations. So with that, I'm going to start with our first question, which I'm going to pose to all the panelists. So to get the conversation going, let's talk a bit about your vision for queering the future of work, both in the spaces that you directly work in and in regards to larger social norms and cultures of work. And in queering the future of work, how do we ensure that there is true intersectionality and consideration of lesser heard voices under the spectrum of US LGBTQ+ communities? And I'll start with you, Kai-Cheng.
Keeps on like freezing for me anyway, so hopefully folks can still see and hear me okay. Yeah, this is a great question, and I think we're speaking in terms of like the ideal or like utopian vision, right? Which is, like I think in the words of a lot of really prominent sci-fi and speculative fiction prophets these days is the thing we want to work back from, right? Like we want to imagine the utopian future and then work toward that. I would say that I would like to aim for an understanding of work as occupation, like an understanding that human beings, queer folks, trans and two-spirit folks, need environments in which our flourishing is seen as one of the priorities of work, which is really in radical opposition to the capitalist, heterocentrist society that we live in now. And I think this is really being highlighted by the situation of the pandemic, in which human flourishing, human health, human life in general is kind of being put on the back burner because we equate economic growth and production as the benchmarks by which we evaluate social success, both on an individual and a collective level. So all that is kind of lofty, but what I'm really saying is that initiatives that are assimilationist. So how do we turn queer people into productive members of the workforce? Maybe accommodations here and there. We're going to slap the right pronouns onto people's name tags, that sort of thing. I think can really only ever be a Band-Aid solution. When we aim for the future of work, I think we also have to aim for a really strong social welfare network. We have to aim for an understanding that folks who are raising children, folks who are socially disabled or who have disabilities, or who simply are unable to work for other reasons, are also kind of held within our network of social welfare, because the future of work cannot be divorced from social and intergenerational health in general.
And we can, seeing that my audio is not working. Can you hear me? Perfect, okay. We're gonna and We're not able to hear you, Peter. Your microphone, or sorry, your video is freezing, so we might have to get you to turn off the webcam to see if that helps with the audio at all.
I think, can you hear me now?
All good.
Perfect. All right. So I guess I'd like to submit 4 general semi-practical rules of thumbs or principles that could inform what we're looking at when we're looking at querying the workspace. And so the first one that I'd like to submit is around looking at leadership leadership actively acknowledging and giving space to the full many manifestations and expressions of queerness that exist and have always existed for millennia. So this within the workplace. And by this, I mean not simply focusing on the most, I guess, popularized forms of queerness that we generally tend to see in the media, which tends to be cisgender and white, but also recognize, as Indigenous peoples have done with the Two-Spirit and then some, the extent to which what we're calling queerness has a long history and multiple manifestations that exist and are being expressed by those who are not white, who are not part of the majority culture, who are either Indigenous or come from other parts of the world. And so allowing that, giving space for that to be acknowledged and flourish, and to be recognized and given space for expression. The second one would be recognizing that queerness itself is a contested discursive space. By this, I mean that the multiple identities that we often assume fit under the umbrella of queerness do not always do so, and people do not always identify fully with this notion of queerness. There's this whole work that's being done around the category, the notion of homonationalism, the extent to which a kind of westernized understanding of sexuality and gender expression and gender identity are being used to flatten the great diversity that, as I said, have existed for centuries around the world. So allowing that space for the contested, or at least the dialogue, to take place around what queerness means, who's excluded and who's not included within that process. So we're truly paying justice, as I say, to the full breadth of diversity that is part of the sexual identity, sexual orientation, and gender expression, gender identity that exist that have existed and still continue to exist around the world. The third one would be integrating what I'm calling the deconstruction and reconstruction procedures, or I should say postures, which are part of queer theory, into every aspect of the workplace. So that obviously touches on what we're calling diversity, inclusion, healthy workplaces, but also beyond that, in terms of our relations with our clients, if I can say, through policy, programs, services, and as if we're talking about government, which I work within, legislation, so that those systemic barriers are identified and removed, so that the iniquities and inequalities are acknowledged and also removed. And so caring, compassion are at the core, and equality and recognition of the core of what it means to govern or to offer governance within these spaces. And lastly, if I may, I would submit the idea of making sure that there's a brave space that's provided to all employees, within which there are clear and enforced sanctions for behaviors, whether microaggressions or more overt or systemic forms of homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, racism, and the list goes on, to ensure that full justice, which was pointed to a bit earlier, is fulfilled. So fundamental justice, and so this can include obviously remedial restorative measures, which is part of many Indigenous and African and other forms of the operationalization of justice, but at least that those are clear, so there's a clear sense from the get-go, from the highest levels, that those types of behaviors are unacceptable and will not be tolerated. This to create that brave and fundamentally safe space for all who are working in the workplace.
Thank you so much, Peter. Finally, we're going to go to Sara Wolfe, pronouns she, her, they, is the director of the Indigenous Innovation Initiative, at Grand Challenges Canada, which is an innovation platform that seeks to spark a new generation of Indigenous innovation and accelerate the emerging Indigenous economic ecosystem. Anishinaabekwe from Northern Ontario with family ties to Brunswick House First Nation. Sarah is a registered nurse, a registered midwife, and holds an MBA from the Rotman School of Management. She was also the founding partner and managing director of 7th Generation Midwives Toronto and the director of clinical services for the Baby Bundle Research Project. The current initiative that she's leading at Grand Challenges Canada is to advance Indigenous gender equality through innovation and social entrepreneurship. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Maria, and I'm just going to get myself set up here. I just want to say thanks and to acknowledge all of the people that have spoken so far and before me, Colin, Sylvia, MPP Jill Andrews, Keith, Kai Cheng, Peter, Maria, and I am really grateful for being invited to participate in this session. It's a really important dialogue, and I'm grateful for the opening and this opportunity. I think for me, the vision of queering the future of work is similar to this idea of indigenizing my work. And, you know, in this idea of indigenizing, I think we need to actually move beyond indigenizing. It's just not a matter of being able to kind of smudge within, you know, a space. We're just not going to bring queer people into a space and then call that, you know, say that we've queered the space. I think that we need to move beyond that and move more towards decolonizing. And, you know, queerness is a part of Indigenous culture. It was colonization that disrupted that knowledge. And because we're all part of a colonial system, and the process of decolonizing is going to make space for Indigenous people, it's also going to make space for Black folks, for people of color, for people who are differently abled and economically disadvantaged, and also for queer folks. At the Indigenous Innovation Initiative, what we started with was a refusal to assume a binary definition of gender and to advocate for explicit inclusion across the program in terms of all of the kind of the engagements, the recordings, the monitorings, the program elements. And we made sure that it was in the language that the community was asking us for. And I think that this is decolonizing. And this is rippling out, right? So we start with one program and then that ripples out. And so it has rippled out into the larger work of Grand Challenges Canada in their global development and in their humanitarian innovation work, which, of course, as we know, like global development work also needs decolonizing. The Prime Minister of Canada imposed that all government departments had to include a GBA plus lens in their deliveries. And what we decided was that we were going to hold them accountable to that. In terms of the considerations for lesser heard queer voices, I think it's similar to lesser heard voices from other communities that have been targeted or excluded, marginalized, and harmed. And it's critical for us to use our power and to center those voices by having them reflected at all the levels of the work. So whether it's the users, the employees, and the decision makers, including senior executives, the government, the board of directors. We heard this over and over again from all of the speakers before. I'm not saying anything new, but we all have to be accountable. Some other key pieces I just wanted to kind of highlight was just other ways that we can bring those lesser heard voices is around making them requirements of our agreements that we have with service providers or our funding partners. Moving more people, whether it's queer, people of color, people marginalized, or whatever it is, but moving them from advisory committees into the decision-making capacities. So I mean, I bet you if I ask around on this panel right now, like how many people have been asked to be on an advisory group and then there's never any change based on the advice that you give. We need people to move into decision-making capacities so that those changes can actually be implemented. We need to make sure we're not putting the burden of diversity and inclusion work on the most vulnerable person in an organization. And we need to give the diversity inclusion initiatives, we need to give them the resources and the power and the support that they need to be effective. We need to recognize and compensate people for their lived experiences and their considerations around access to services, access to programs, access to care. We need to consider those lived experiences around our HR policies, and even just like our business models that we work under. So I think I'll leave it at that for now. I know you have a lot of questions.
Thank you so much to all three of you for making so many wonderful and thoughtful, insightful points there. You know, there was a lot of sort of interrelated and mutually sort of reinforcing concepts that were brought up. You know, from being transformative instead of using band-aid approaches, deconstructing and reconstructing, decolonizing, and these ideas of moving from strategy. Yes, there it is, Sarah. From strategy to action and impactful decision making. So with that, I'm going to move into a couple more questions that are directed individually to each of the panelists before we move on to some audience question and answers. I'm first going to go to Kai Cheng. And Kai Cheng, how do we effectively make space for queer and trans voices and stories? And how do we move from tokenism to true queer transformation? And in doing so, how do we address challenges like, for example, the growing professionalization of sectors like the nonprofit world that contribute directly to exclusion, or the enduring...
Salient question, and I think it really speaks to, like again, I think I just also really want to thank Sarah for like the message of decolonize first, because I think that strategy is like really woven into the answers the Western you're talking about. So, you know, I often think about workplace, I guess we could call them diversity and inclusion or equity or anti-oppression practice as like looking at a maze, right? And I think really often, working as a consultant, I can say that really very frequently, leadership such as boards, executive directors, upper management, often seems to be looking for like a perfect answer, right? Like, what is the series of workshops, or maybe just like the 1-2-hour workshop that will lead us through the maze, and then we're going to come out on the other side basically looking the same as an organization or company, but, you know, will also magically be really equitable and everyone will be happy and no one will get in any legal or liability issues, right? And to that, I think I have to say, like, that doesn't exist, right? Like, so there isn't like this perfect pathway through the maze, and certainly that pathway isn't going to be found through, for example, corporate diversity workshops or corporate anti-racism workshops. That, you know, I think that's you know, sometimes useful, but most generally kind of like a misleading approach. The question is, how do you take down the maze, right? Or like, how do you fundamentally restructure? And, you know, my co-panelists have already kind of spoken to this, but on a specific example maybe is like trans women of color. So, you know, really frequently I find myself in situations where people will say, oh, we have the perfect job for you here in the nonprofit sector or in academia or in the arts. And, you know, I find it interesting because there are these arrays of opportunities that are open to me because people are looking for a token. And that token, you know, like myself, usually is someone who is, you know, considered like kind of articulate in the colonial sense. I have 2 master's degrees and a lot of experience. I'm also light-skinned and have a kind of a host of other privileges. But when it comes to, say, hiring like a diversity or like a large group or trans women of color as a whole, suddenly you come up against this question like, oh, we can't find enough qualified candidates. Even if the hiring process is targeted toward being open, or, you know, minorities are encouraged to apply, quote unquote, there's this sort of barrier of like, well, no one's qualified enough, we couldn't find the right person. And this, again, I think is really like, okay, so when you're restructuring the maze, we have to think about what kind of experience do we value? Like, what do we consider to be valuable knowledge, wisdom in the field, all that sort of thing. Who is really out there doing the work, and how do you find people who are qualified in that way instead of professionalized ways? You know, the professionalization that involves having multiple degrees, which is increasing, you know, in the work sector these days, is really, really like a key barrier. And then also thinking about investing, right? And this is a solution that, you know, is not, you know, coming from me. A lot of people have said this before, but really investing like in the notion of like creating a qualified workforce, right? So if one wants to hire trans women of color, that doesn't mean you're expecting the perfect trans woman of color to fall into your lap through the hiring process, but to really do targeted outreach, mentorship, and bring trans women up through one's network. That means investing in individual worker success. It means creating pathways to leadership that are open to a wide diversity of, oh, sorry, my computer's just flickering here, open to a wide diversity of experiences. And, you know, I think what this really also means is being prepared to make a greater investment in terms of time and financially in bringing workers to the level that they need to in order to function well in their jobs, to flourish in their jobs, and to bring added value to workplaces. And that really is about like putting one's feet to the fire. Again, this is not like kind of rocket science. It's about like upper level management, board, CEOs, the people who are in power, really, really investing in structural change. And that just means spending more money and time and being brave most of the time.
Thank you so much, Kai-Cheng. Your point around restructuring the maze really resonates, and you know, without this, we'll always be sort of relying on systems and structures that are inherently exclusionary. And it's also really great to hear, you know, some of these specifics about what organizations can specifically do. Invest in your people, and invest in including more people as well. So thank you for that. I'm going to move to Sara now for the next question. Sara, in your current role, what innovations and transformations are we already seeing from Indigenous US LGBTQ+ folks communities? And beyond the scope of your current work or your current role, how can we, in a larger sense, ensure inclusion of queer, trans, and...
Okay, thanks. I think when I look around, I see queer, indigiqueer, two-spirit folks. They're more engaged than they've ever been before, right? And more than like defying the stereotypes, they're redefining identity and redefining that identity across race, gender, sexuality, ability, and they're empowering the next generation to do that. For my part, as an Indigenous person, as a cis woman, as a single parent, as a queer two-spirit person, I could go on and on. I work to advocate for spaces that see beyond that identity location and to see and engage individuals as the unique intersection of opportunities that they are, and trying to design programs and services that meet people where they're at with like flexibility, client-centered policies, choice, self-determination, safety, and to try at least to do this with a commitment to meaningful relationships, meaningful engagement, and an open heart, right? You need an open heart to hear feedback and to learn from that feedback and know that we're in this process together of learning together and working together. And by making that space, so we just launched our first round call for seed funding for Indigenous innovation, and the challenge statement that we put out was to advance Indigenous equality through innovation and social entrepreneurship using a gender lens. And it could be anything from that perspective. We got applications, 80% of the leads were identified as women, 5% identified as non-binary. We had, of the projects, more than half were specific projects. I mean, we're talking about business innovation, social innovation, all these different innovations. 40% of the projects were specific to supporting or advancing equality for two-spirit and queer folks. Just by making that space available, we had that many applications come in to support them. So what I see is that a lot of work has been done before me. So like, look, that we're having this conversation in partnership with the Conference Board of Canada. Like, that is pretty awesome in and of itself. I don't even know that that would have happened even 5 years ago, let alone now. But when I'm down about how hard the work is and how hard I have to work day to day to be the advocate or be the voice or to kind of advocate for things that just really should be, I like to reflect on the work of the amazing leaders and warriors before me. And so people like Sylvia Maracle, who have made it possible for someone like me to thrive with as much that I have and as much power and position that I have. And that power and that position, that also comes with privilege. And with that privilege, I then have a responsibility to make space and lift voices and raise equality even closer to the point where this is actually not even a conversation we need to have anymore. Like Sylvia Maracle was one of my very first teachers. When I was working at the Odawa Friendship Center many years ago, I remember coming in for a training at the OFIFC, and that it was those teachings that, you know, I have a responsibility to build off of that work and to reach my fullest potential, to support people so that they can reach their fullest potential, and to see that my contributions can be just another rung in the ladder that helps the next generation climb up even further, and we can surpass these meager but pivotal achievements that we've all seen.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I really love your point around having open hearts and learning together. And your acknowledgement of you know, how difficult and challenging this work can be, but also worth it. And there are so many wonderful people who have come before us in a big way. And you know, just it's unfortunate that we're still fighting the good fight, but we will continue to, of course. I'm going to move on to Peter for our last question. Peter, what are the skills, behaviors, and approaches needed from both 2S LGBTQ+ and non-2S LGBTQ+ employees to support true transformation of workplace norms and cultures and to really be inclusive leaders? What are some of the strategies or the approaches we can take? And perhaps you can speak to some of the ways in which your Secretariat is taking on these challenges.
Yes, thank you. So let me begin just by explaining that for the Federal Anti-Racism Secretariat, our mandate is more external looking. So we're working on supporting racialized communities, religious minorities, and Indigenous peoples to address the systemic barriers that they encounter, racial discrimination, as well as hate that they encounter within the communities and writ large across the country, and ensuring that our policies, programs, services, and legislation at the federal level are adequately addressing, and if they are barriers, that we're working to remove those barriers and work with our counterparts across government to advance new responsive initiatives. So there are quite a lot of groups and organizations. I think of the Indigenous public servants committees, queer public service committees, and the Federal Black Employees Caucus, and many others that are doing critical work around the workplace and healthy workplace. But in terms of the strategies which that the Secretariat is advancing, which can have a kind of a ripple effect on changing or impacting or transforming the workplace, one of the, I guess, cardinal principles of our work is that in order to change policy, program, service, and legislation and make sure that they're adequately addressing the needs of communities, we need to make sure that those communities are at the table helping to influence and shape the policymaking process. And so that's really part of democratizing the policymaking process, because we are not able to do our job if we're not ensuring that those voices which have historically been excluded and marginalized are not at that table. And that, of course, includes the principle of intersectionality. So recognizing that no community is a monolith, that there's a wide diversity within each community, and there are also power dynamics that are existent and manifested. And so, how do we kind of work to remove those power dynamics with communities, and also reduce the power dynamic that exists between those who hold the levers of power and those that are trying to basically survive, to thrive in these trying and discriminatory times, and through our institutions, which we largely recognize are impregnated by systemic racism. And so by doing that, by bringing communities into the table, into the halls of power, as I like to say, we're already there starting to transform the relationship that the workplace, if I can call it the federal workplace, has with Canadians in general, particularly the historically marginalized and excluded. And that has consequences because in that dialogue, they help to point out some of the barriers and some of the inequities that exist within the workplace. However, it is key that, as everyone has said prior to me, that senior leadership, the senior executives, don't just stop there. Use that the information, the knowledge, and the recommendations coming from communities to ensure and to transform the ways in which we do business internally. So that's part of, as I said, democratizing the policy-making process. It's also part of, as we've been saying, decolonizing that process, because as we probably remember, the calls to justice of the National Inquiry into Missing Indigenous Women and Girls points out that there's a lot of work that needs to be done around looking at the erasure and violence committed against Indigenous LGBTQ2+ and two-spirited folk across the country and historically. And so bringing that together, that's really about opening up, as I say, the halls of power, ensuring that people can participate and shape essentially the future of the country.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's really great to hear the efforts that have been taken to democratize and, as you say, in the process, decolonize, the building of these policies, legislation, programs, services, etc. So thank you very much for that, and thank you to all the panelists for your answers. I know we're at time now, but if you're able to stick around for a couple minutes, we can see if there's any questions from the chat. If you have to hop off, that's okay. But we'll see if we can take at least one, maybe two questions from the chat, if there are any that have come through. And I'm seeing thumbs up from the panelists, so we're good to stay for a couple extra minutes, and then we'll hand things back to you, Colin. So let me see if we have any questions in here. Lots of thank yous and well wishes.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to give folks a couple seconds to see if there is any questions coming through. There's a bunch of people typing. Okay, there's a question for Kai-Cheng and the rest of the panel. What do you say to C-suite folks who are panicked that this work will have them out of a job? Meaning, if the structures are overhauled, it will eventually mean the C-suite leadership will no longer be all white and cisgender male-female, which means some
could clarify that for me. That would be awesome. What is the term C-suite?
Pardon, what was that, Kai-Cheng? I think I missed the beginning of what you said.
Ah, right. Okay. Which means someone will be out of a job. Yeah. I mean, I think first of all, I want to say there isn't like a great answer to that, except that I don't think we need to work from a scarcity model when it comes to restructuring the workplace. Like I think that is like one of the facets of like neoliberal capitalism today, is that there's a sense of well, there's only so much wealth, and so only a certain number of people get to have it, and so I'm going to guard my own position really really intensely, and I just don't think that has to happen. I think there is like kind of a real question around like, well, like how much power and how much wealth have the executive class, or the upper class become accustomed to, right? And to what extent is that power and that wealth, that privilege, actually based upon the exploitation of others? And in this case, I would say, it actually, I think there's like some revolutionary work to be done there, in the sense of, in the first line, persuading folks that they don't need to be exploitative, and that like a certain level of wealth or comfort or power is not necessary to either one's personal life or to the coherent functioning of an organization. And then in the second place, also saying, well, if folks aren't willing to be persuaded in that way, well, actually, it is also in the best interest of of leaders to engage in restructuring simply because like the larger body of society won't tolerate that anymore. So all this is to say is like, yes, change is scary, especially if one is really enjoying the status quo right now. But change is necessary in order to ensure, the safety and the flourishing of all. And secondly, we're in a political moment where, clinging to the status quo is not really, I think, going to be like a safe position in any case. Like it takes courage to step forward, and on a practical level, that might mean engaging in corporate coaching or like leadership coaching, that sort of thing, so that people have support in order to make change. But I also think like whether or not we folks like it, this is the kind of change that has to happen, and it's going to.
Thank you, Kai. Did either of the other panelists want to add to that point as well? Or sorry, to that question?
I put my answer in the chat, but I think that Kai Cheng hit it exactly, is this idea of scarcity and the idea that, just by one, there is somebody out of a job, is the idea that we need to actually be focused on, is somebody is out of a job by not making that space. But if actually we lift everyone up, then everyone in society gets the benefit. And then someone had a really great analogy about all.
And I'd just like to add, yes, but also we should not forget that it's a legal imperative. We live in a country that functions according to the rule of the law, and the law is clear in terms of what diversity should look like, what inclusion should look like, what anti-racism should look like. And so we also need to make sure that we are, as institutions, as workers, as a workplace, living up to what the legal expectations are.
Thank you. And to close us off, we're going to take one final question. This one comes from Julie Leflem, and it's in French, so I think we're going to address this one to Peter. Peter, can you see the question in the chat, or would you like me? I can read it out.
OK. Donc la question est qui est un modèle de réussite, un mentor, un conférencier, influenceur à votre avis? Donc selon moi, il y a une panoplie d'influenceurs, de modèles de réussite qui existent. Pour ce qui est en fait comprendre un exemple de leadership que je pourrais citer, si ce serait entre autres ce serait les fondateurs, les fondatrices, dirais-je, de Black Lives Matter au Canada. Ce sont des femmes queer qui se sont vraiment, des étudiantes qui se sont vraiment organisées pour avoir une influence qui va au-delà même du pays du Canada pour changer les choses, pour non seulement éveiller les consciences sur le racisme systémique et l'homophobie et la transphobie, mais également de faire en sorte que les ressources soient mises à la disposition des communautés pour mieux les servir et mieux adresser les barrières systémiques. Donc ça, c'est un exemple, mais comme je disais, il y a vraiment une panoplie de genre de différentes communautés, de différentes origines qui sont des modèles de réussite qui sont en train d'avoir un impact important autour d'eux, et même au-delà de ça. Donc, je vous encouragerais de faire un peu de recherche, ou vous pouvez me contacter, puis je pourrais vous donner une liste un peu plus vaste de personnes à considérer.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to wrap things up now. A huge thank you to all three of you for such a wonderful and insightful conversation and for your time here today. Thank you to everyone in the audience and for the fantastic questions. And a huge thank you finally on behalf of Conference Board. We were so happy.
That was an incredible discussion. Thank you so much, everyone. And our apologies, for the technical disruption. I'm glad we're able to get back online and hear that great discussion with our panelists. I'm really pleased that we could speak to structural issues today. I know that everyone wants quick fixes. And everybody likes to take those back to work, but I think it was so important to hear from our panelists that the work that needs to be done is much, much, much more complicated than many employers truly understand. So we look forward to continuing this conversation as we further explore the future of work for our communities. And thank you so much, Maria, for leading that excellent conversation. We really appreciate your guidance there. I also want to thank Dr. Sylvia Maracle, Dr. Jill Andrew, Keith Smith, the Conference Board of Canada, each of our panelists, and of course you, the audience, for joining us today and for all of your great engagement in the chat. Before we close, I'd like to share a few resources and some reminders. One reminder being that today's session was recorded, so we'll email everyone instructions on accessing that video as soon as it's ready. We also have a bunch of links here to a number of resources. They're posted on both in the presentation as well as in the window below. There's some great links to Pride at Work Canada resources as well as some resources from the Conference Board of Canada. I hope that you can join us on Wednesday, August 12th for our final virtual ProPride event, Generation Z, Queer and Trans on the Job, presented in partnership with Youth Fusion. You can register for that on our website the same way you registered for the session today. So thank you once again for joining us. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And wherever you are, happy Pride.